so here for another edition of On the Docket, to depress us into a puddle of goo, is retired federal judge Nancy Gertner. She's a senior lecturer at Harvard Law School and a BPR contributor. Hello there, Judge Gertner.
Hello.
Hello.
I can barely speak.
Yeah, well, a lot of us are in that same position, although most of the country is cheering, so we are now in the minority, I guess, Judge Gertner. But in any case, we're a judge for many years, and during the previous Trump administration, we had quite a few judges appointed that the Lawyers Association, American Bar Association, did not think were qualified to be appointed judges. I think some of us are worried about what will happen, particularly in the Supreme Court, when 53 of 54 members of the Senate, majority of the Senate, is going to be approving could be approving Supreme Court justices.
You want me to know? Well, clearly what's going to happen is that it's reported that Alito and Thomas will both want to leave. And they will then be replaced by, 20-year-old conservatives.
Yeah.
That's an overstatement. They will be replaced by younger conservatives, which will then bake in the Republican supermajority for decades, essentially.
Oh, the judge needs help with her
No,
microphone,
I think, well, she's
I got
almost
it's
good.
okay.
It might be loose.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those who think that's just a wild speculation, if I'm not wrong, the three justices nominated by Trump in his first term were all either 49, I think in Coney Barrett's case, or young 50s, which means they could be on the court through 8 presidents, potentially, regardless of what their policies are.
I mean, the only hope would be that if the Democrats regain the Senate at some point, there could be structural change in the Supreme Court with either term limits or enlarging the court. But certainly for the short term, Thomas has been talking about leaving, Alito has been talking about leaving, and this would be the moment for them to leave. So
you were on the presidential commission under Biden, obviously, to look at potential court reform. With all due respect, when the Democrats controlled the Senate, which they do now, there was a handful of senators with the courage to confront this issue. So I don't know if you're hopeful or not. I don't know about the future, but there's another scenario playing out. As much as the world in which I lived admired Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I know is a friend of yours, they didn't admire after the fact that she stuck around as long as she did. And as a result, we got a justice who would not be exactly who Ruth Bader Ginsburg probably would have picked herself. Justice Sotomayor is not a kid. She apparently has some form of diabetes, which is a bit of an issue. There is talk as recently as Wednesday morning about whether or not she should step down now, while the Democrats still have majority in the Senate. Joe Biden is still president, and try to do what, if Mitch McConnell could do what he did in both kinds of directions, why can't the Senate confirm a 40-year-old version of her? What do you think of that?
The question is whether there's enough time.
Right.
Right? That's the only
Or if
question.
she'd do it. Well,
right. One question whether she would do it, and the other is if there's enough time. And the two are related in the sense that I don't think that she'd do it if there's any chance that it wouldn't work. If there's any chance that they wouldn't be able to deliver on a new nominee. I mean, you understand, so that the Democrats' roots to the Supreme Court are not like the Republicans. The Republican, through Leonard Leo, had a list.
Federalist Society.
Federalist Society, right. He had a list and names that were ready to go. I don't think that the Democrats have anything like that. So there would be a question of who would replace her. There would be a question of how to vet that person, and then whether the Senate could act quickly enough.
Well, I'm going to look this up now, or Jamie, if you don't mind. I think there was lightning speed with Coney Barrett, if I remember.
Yes.
Correct. Can you switch headphones if you don't mind? Because that one's obviously not working terribly well.
Yeah, but and also, I mean, I know we're talking about the Supreme Court too, but I'm very concerned about other judges as well, because we had a lot of people, as I said before, that were appointed to lower courts that had a lot of strange ideas. You want the courts to kind of prevent bad things from happening, but who's the judge down in Texas?
Matthew Kacsmaryk.
Yeah, he's the one that was opposed to in vitro fertilization, even though the legislature was not happy with that. But he was a judge. I mean, there are judges like this all over the country.
Aileen Cannon, how about in Florida?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but except for me, who had was pretty outspoken liberal on lots of issues. For the most part, judges, Democratic judges, and even Republican judges, except for Trump, have selected people in direct proportion to their never having taken, public positions on anything. That made them easier to confirm, and I think that affects who you are on the bench, which is you become moderate right, moderate left. Trump had a different route. People were selected by Trump in direct proportion to how outspoken they were on the issues that he cared about. And sure enough, when they get on the bench, that's what they're reflecting. In addition, there's a sense that if you want to go from the district court on up, you need Kaczmarek-type decisions, you need Cannon-type decisions, and that will enable you to be promoted. The Democrats, Biden has put numbers and numbers with Elizabeth Warren and Markey, numbers of public defenders, labor lawyers on the bench. But even so, the incentives to be outspoken are not the same.
Judge Gertner, can I return to this? We just looked up. We have a difference, one of my coworkers and I. But from the date that Amy Coney Barrett was nominated by Donald Trump till her confirmation date, one source says 38 days. I see 30 days. Both of those numbers are far less than the number of days until Donald Trump is sworn in for his second term. And it seems to me, and I don't think you disagree, one of the reasons there's such imbalance is the Republicans know how to play the judicial game, and the Democrats play by a set of rules that were fine when people treated each other respectfully, but they don't anymore.
Well, the question is whether there's a name that would, first of all, there's a question whether there's a name.
Pick, I'm serious, I find that hard to believe. You couldn't say right now 3 people who are really talented who could get 50 votes plus Vice President Harris?
I think I can talk about 3 people who would be really talented. The question is whether they'd get 50 votes. Part of the issue, is something that came up in this election, which is the Democrats have more complicated selection issues. Have diversity issues, et cetera, which, so who's next is a question for them. It's not just the most fabulous person, but who's next would be a question. And I don't know. I think, they could do it. They could do it.
Do you know Sotomayor?
I do, very well.
I know, I thought so. Is she, I know, obviously this is an issue I'm sure you haven't discussed with her. I assume you haven't discussed with her. She the kind of person who, if she thought it could be done and there was a good choice, would say, this is probably the right thing to do for my country?
Yeah, she could. She would do that. Yeah, she would do that. The issue is going to be the risk of it not happening would be a court that is so baked in that no one wants to take that chance.
And then there's a vacancy that Trump is able to fill come the end of January.
But I do want to repeat the fact.
Well, this is an interesting, excuse me, here's an interesting idea from one of our coworkers. Is it you? How about there's a vice president who doesn't have a job, who apparently was a pretty good lawyer out there in California. How about that?
That'd be interesting.
Okay, there you go.
Or Obama was always a possibility. He was talked about for the Supreme Court.
Constitutional lawyer, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Talking to Nancy Gertner, former federal judge.
So, Judge Gertner, after the Dobbs decision and abortion was outlawed in many states across the country, we had a kind of pushback against that. Earlier on, we had another pushback. 7 of the 10 states that had on the ballot at this election on Tuesday voted to strengthen abortion laws. But I think a lot of people are wondering what the Trump administration could still do and what he could do here in Massachusetts if there is what some people have talked about in Congress, a national abortion ban. Is Massachusetts
If there's a national abortion ban, then the protection for abortion rights under our Constitution would be superseded.
Didn't your husband and you have something to do with that?
I was the one who, John and I litigated the
John
case.
Reinstein,
John Reinstein, my husband, and I were the ones who litigated the case that in 1980 established the right to choose under the Massachusetts Constitution. But if there were a federal abortion ban, that could put even states that have abortion protections at risk because the federal government supersedes state governments. There could be an issue about whether that would supersede a state constitutional grounding, but it would certainly put it at risk. Now, there are ways around it. What Biden has done essentially is to, in numbers of ways, done executive orders and to make it easy to make it, you don't have to have in-person appointments to get abortion. He's loosened up some of the regulations around mifepristone, the abortion pill. What Trump could do, even in the absence of an abortion ban, is things like pull the funding on Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood gets federal funds. Pull the funding all around the world with, with various kinds of birth control programs. And that would make a difference.
Can we get back to also what it seemed? I don't know if you're the one that said this to us, but at least my analysis. One of the reasons why the Supreme Court, not too long ago, last year I think, or maybe earlier this year, decided to take a pass on the whole issue of abortion pills, mifepristone, and found that there was no standing, meaning not ruling on the merits, but that the plaintiffs were not the proper plaintiffs, was I concluded, because they're worried it would affect the outcome of the election in a way they wouldn't like. Well, the election is over. And I assume that kind of case is going to get back to them yet again. And why should we not assume that if this is an anti-choice court, it's going to be anti-choice when it comes to medication too?
Well, mifepristone is a little bit more complicated because it implicates all the states, not just one state, and it implicates the Federal Drug, the FDA.
Sure.
So that there was a challenge. Judge Kaczmarek said that that it really was dangerous and that it really was problematic. That was a direct challenge to findings of the FDA that was exactly the opposite. So that theory that the FDA mifepristone challenge, I think it's a little hard for the court to tip that. Could one say, assuming it's safe and assuming it's fine, nevertheless, in the states that have banned abortion, it can be banned as well? That's a different kind of challenge.
Yeah, it is.
And it can be banned as well because, they believe in the sanctity of, quote, fetal life. So yeah, that could happen. They also could restrict the supply of mifepristone by enforcing the Comstock Act, which is an 1873 act. It's extraordinary that we're talking about that. An 1873 act which sort of limited, it was mostly about birth control, limited the transportation of birth control, criminalized it across state lines. It hasn't been employed anywhere.
But hasn't
they could
Thomas
do
said
that.
in a dissent or something, and something
Yeah,
recently,
yeah.
we should take a look at the
Yeah,
Comstock
right,
Act?
right. I mean, let me just pause for a second. This is less legal than political and
course.
historical. The notion that we're talking about an 1873 act is actually very interesting because it was around this time that you had the resurgence of anti-abortion legislation, and it was not for the purpose of protecting life. Historians who've looked at it had said it was for the purpose of controlling women. In the 1870s, around the same time, there were women who wanted to be lawyers, and the Supreme Court told them that they couldn't be lawyers. So it was not part and parcel of a concern about life. It was part and parcel of a concern about controlling women, and it still is.
You know what I wonder about, and I'm not a lawyer, so maybe this is a
But you play one on radio.
I don't. And this seems like probably a stupid question, but we've had several cases since Dobbs where women have been denied medical care for so long that they were unable, after the medical care, to have children again. Their fertility was impacted. Or we have, in the worst cases, a few women who've died because they haven't gotten care and they've had septic shock and that kind of thing. Isn't this somehow illegal to let someone die because can one of these women, and we hope we don't have more of these, but we probably will, file some kind of suit?
But there has been suits filed because there's a federal requirement of providing emergency care in the case of a medical emergency, not
It's called the
life
Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act.
Yeah, right.
But they're not doing it.
Well, no, there's litigation. The Supreme Court didn't decide to take the case, but there's litigation all over the country that says that emergency requirement, forgive the verb, trumps these abortion restrictions, that they have to give emergency care. That's litigation that we're in the midst of. We haven't yet really finished that. The Supreme Court didn't take the relevant cases, but that's still going on.
And what do you think the Supreme Court would do about a case like that?
Well, I mean, what they should do is to say that federal law invariably, just as the National Abortion Act would have impact on state regulations, likewise a national emergency medical care law should be able to trump local laws. That's what they should decide. I've given up the business of predicting what this court will decide, so who knows? The only thing one can say about it is that I actually think that although the Harris campaign didn't succeed, the discussion about what was going on with women's health in her talks and in Michelle Obama's talk, I suspect will have made a difference. It was not a difference to disqualify Trump, but I suspect it will made a difference, and it certainly made a difference in him backing off
Yes,
from
Trump,
a national
you mean.
abortion
Yeah.
abortion
Yeah,
ban.
until he has
Yeah.
the House and the Senate. Let's see
By
if
the
he's
way-
backing off if he ends up winning the House.
A texter has a good question here. We were talking before about the Supreme Court. You were mentioning Leonard Leo and the lineup from the Heritage Foundation of Republican justices to go on the court. Is it really true, the texter asked, that the Democrats don't have a list of judicial nominees queued up and ready to go? Why not? Isn't that what's wrong with the Democrats?
Well, they may. I don't know. But in the case of the Republicans, there was, a non-governmental entity that had been working this list for years. Maybe there's another non-governmental entity on the Democratic side that is doing that. I don't know about it.
Yeah.
Because what was so shocking about the Federalist Society is that they were cultivating people from law school to who they clerked for, to who they worked for, and then to get on the bench. There is certainly not that kind of network on the side of the Democrats. So by the time they proposed Amy Coney Barrett, they knew who she was to the nth degree. They knew what she'd written, they knew what she talked about, the courses she'd taken. I don't know if the Democrats have a comparable list.
It would be
By
a
the way,
good
that
idea, perhaps, to
Yes.
have one.
Yes.
We're talking to Nancy Gertner, the former federal judge. Her segment used to be called On the Docket. It is now called We're Doomed. We've actually just changed the name. Speaking of doomed, there's no discussion anymore. The special counsel, Smith, is going to be gone. The federal case around the insurrection is going to be gone one way or another, and you're nodding, and I assume that's a given. If it's not, please say so. One issue for me is, will there be pressure on the governor of New York to pardon Trump, or whatever the proper verb is, in terms of his 30-some felonies? She has the statutory power to do that. The Georgia Board of Pardons has the power to dismiss those cases down there,
Well,
too. There's going to be a lot of pressure on that, isn't
Well,
it?
let's separate out.
Okay.
Let's separate out the federal cases. So the federal cases will likely must end because the Department of Justice has a policy of you can't prosecute a president while he is in office. So they're
Okay.
going to end. The question is how they're going to end. In the case of the January 6th case, the question is whether Smith will then do what Mueller did, which is at least write a report that talks about what the crimes were, report both for the January 6th prosecution and for the classified documents case. Against writing a report is everybody knows what's in it. In favor of writing a report is he has to put down markers here. He has to make it clear that these were crimes and that he believed that they were crimes, even if there are no consequences. So those are the federal cases.
Okay.
The state cases, I think that's an open question. Marchand in the state hush money case has a decision on Monday whether or not to give whether Trump is immune for paying off a porn star. The sentence really makes me even crazy, the notion that conceivably could be immune. And I think he'll find that he's not immune. Then he's going to have a sentencing. And the
November
question is,
26th.
Yeah, the question is what he's going to do about that. He likewise, with the federal cases, knows that Trump can't be serving a state sentence while he's president. And so there's a question about whether he gives him, probation or something that can be served before January 20th. He gives him nothing. He delays the case for 4 years. We've never been here before.
Well,
know-
can I speak? Just say one thing about this. I am one who strongly believes that the failure for there to be any accountability for the behavior of Donald Trump is an historic crime. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, owns a lot of that in terms of his lack of speed
And the courts, and the courts,
expedition
yep.
and the courts. However, and while the flip side argument upsets me, but I think it has some merit that we talked about a little bit yesterday, is every single person voting, it's fair to say, knew that there are criminal allegations against him. I'm assuming the vast majority knew that he was a felon, since Kamala Harris and Joe Biden said it nonstop. And the American people decided we'd prefer him to be in the White House than to be sentenced or in jail. And while that may upset me, that's not a nothing argument in terms of equity, it seems to me.
Right,
what
but
do you think?
that's not what Judge Mershon should be thinking about. Mershon has to think about, I have 34 counts of conviction, I don't think that he's immune from that. What should he get for that? Now, I was on record saying that Trump should not be sent to prison even before the election. So what's available could be a fine, and that's a statement of accountability. Maybe it would it would still go up the line and be appealed. Your question before about whether the governor of New York should pardon him.
Based on the thing I just said to you.
Yeah, I would think not, because again, I think we have to, even if we can't accomplish what these prosecutions set out to do, I think we have to lay down markers.
I agree with you.
I think you have to say that this was wrong conduct.
You know what I wonder, though? I mean, we talked last week about this concept of anticipatory obedience, where people like, Bezos from Amazon or Zuckerberg from Facebook and Meta were sucking up a little bit to Trump in anticipation of him possibly winning, even Tim Cook from Apple and some of these other people. So if I were Judge Merchant, and knowing that Donald Trump says, anyway, he's got this list of people he's going to go after, I'd be nervous about what could happen to me. I mean, these guys, Bezos and Zuckerberg, they've got billions of dollars. They can have 24-hour security and they could move, they could do all these things.
Trump has attacked his daughter, too.
His daughter as well. So it takes real chutzpah to just put that aside and do what you think is right legally and not think about your own neck.
Yes, but I think that, that's what being a judge is about. That's what you signed on for.
Yeah.
So...
will he get any money if he needs it for protection?
No. Well, he'll get protection from the court, from the state court, yeah. But, I think that's what you signed on for. I mean, that you had the clarity to say that something is wrong that is wrong. And, you take the consequences. I mean, to some degree, threats are actually part of the job. We've all been threatened. And that's what you have to do. There's other questions about whether, by the way, Biden would pardon his son or his brother as a way to take them off the chopping block. I actually predict he won't.
Do you think he'll pardon Trump? There's a move afoot to urge him to do that, too.
I mean, I don't know why he would. Again, Trump is going to be president. In the case of Nixon, Nixon was obviously out of politics. Trump is going to be president, and it seems to me that these convictions should stay on the record.
So you have any good news before you go, or anything?
Hold on for 1 second.
Apparently not.
Hold on for 1 second, though.
We are here.
I get what you're saying, but I mean, if Trump pardons all the January 6 people, including the guy that ran at the head of Proud Boys, who was sentenced to 22 years in jail, God, if I were Biden, I would pardon my own son in a second after watching that.
But, it's interesting that, this has been the dilemma throughout the Biden-Trump years.
Yeah.
And the dilemma is Democrats play by the rules and the Republicans don't.
Right.
There is a value to playing by the rules. There's an institutional value. So, for example, we've read online that there could have been even challenges to this vote, where they, outcome determinative challenges, likely not, but the Democrats were not even going to go there, and she was going to concede. With respect to the pardoning your own son,
Who could go to prison?
Who could go to prison?
The son of Joe Biden.
You left out of your story. Joe Biden said he wouldn't do it.
I know he said he wouldn't do it, but
that speaks to one side has to stand up for values. One side has to govern or judge, or in a way that is neutral, that is for the people. One side has to do that. So I don't think. But there was also a prior question, which again is a political question, not usually what I like to talk about. But when Biden decided to run for office, he knew that his family would be in the crosshairs, and he made that decision. So that's consistent with his then not wanting to pardon his son. But the bottom line is, after the initial shock, there are state governors, including our own, who will talk about hardening the state against the onslaught that will come with respect to illegal aliens and mass deportation. There are people who are, preparing challenges to various things that are going to come down the line. Yes, we have this Supreme Court. One can only hope that even the Supreme Court recognizes that they've gone too far.
Oh yeah, that'll
think
be
so?
happening really soon.
They've gone too far. Well, there's at least a discussion about whether Justices Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Barrett
Yes.
will look at things differently, and there's some suggestion of that. Now, looking at things differently is not necessarily the way we would have looked
Did you
at
read
it.
the
but
New
I
York
do
Times
think
piece on Roberts when people like Marjorie have been saying for years he cares enough about
Yeah.
the integrity of the court that he'll be the balance? Well, he's not the balance
He
anymore.
had
He's
not-
all in.
Right, he had not been the balance. But the question is whether, in the face of a Republican president, Senate, and House, he will recognizes that he's the last one. I don't know. I mean, I'm not. When you ask me sometimes what the Supreme Court is going to do, the answer is beats me because we didn't predict any of this.
Yeah. Where might they think they've gone too far?
Well, the question is, where they've already gone too far. I mean, the immunity decision.
Insane.
The immunity
Yeah.
decision was extraordinary.
Yeah, that makes us all nervous.
The immunity decision was extraordinary. I mentioned the last time I was on here that, there was a very easy way out for the court, and the easy way out was to say, I don't know what immunity is in general in other contexts, but in this context,
Exactly right.
overturning this election, you're not immune. Instead, Gorsuch, during the oral argument, said, I want to come up with a rule for the ages. Judges don't come up with rules for the ages. Legislatures come up for. Judges decide particular cases. And so you knew right away what he was doing.
Well, you're a really calming influence, Judge. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
It's great to see you.
Thank you.
We
Judge
have been
Nancy
speaking-
Gertner.